He sat in his private cart aboard his own train as the night sky drifted past the window in cold silence. Across from him, the other three focused entirely on the chessboards placed between them. 3 separate games, 3 separate opponents, and Jack White played all of them at once. The steady sound of the train echoed softly through the cart as chess pieces moved one after another across the boards. One of the men leaned forward, intensely focused, his eyes narrowed on the board in front of him. Jack glanced down briefly, then spoke calmly. "Move my bishop there." The piece was moved. The man froze. A moment later, he leaned back in defeat. "Well, checkmate." Jack gave a small nod. The man exhaled softly, then reached beside him for his revolver. He began cleaning it while still watching the remaining games unfold. Now 2 games remained. The second man was already under pressure. Jack barely looked at that board anymore. Every now and then, while watching the night outside the window, he simply gave another instruction. Knight to f6. A few moves later, queen forward. Silence. Then the second man cursed quietly under his breath and leaned back. "Damn it!" Jack finally turned his attention to the board. Checkmate. The second man shook his head with a faint smile, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small throwing knife. Leaning back in his seat, he calmly began sharpening the blade while watching the final game continue. Now, only one opponent remained. Geshny. Unlike the others, she stayed completely focused. Her light brown skin reflected softly under the dim lantern light of the cart. Her long black hair, as dark as the night outside, rested over her shoulders. Her eyes never left the board. Jack studied her quietly for a moment. "You can still end it in a draw." Geshny immediately shook her head. "No, I'll see it through." A faint smile crossed Jack's face. "Very well." She carefully moved her queen. Jack looked down once, then leaned back slightly. "Move my queen to c6. The moment the piece touched the board, Geshny's expression changed. She searched quickly for another line, another possibility, anything, but there was nothing. Jack calmly folded his hands. Checkmate. Geshny stared at the board for a few seconds, then leaned back in her chair. "Well played, boss." Jack nodded once. "Good game." For a short while, only the sound of the train remained. Then Jack looked toward one of the older men seated nearby. The prince replied. The elderly man nodded. "Yes, word came through earlier." Jack waited. The man continued. "He mentioned that he has already begun recruiting a few people for you, men that might be useful." Jack gave a slight nod. "Well, if he had given me a little more time, I could have handled this myself." His eyes drifted toward the dark window beside him. "But I suppose Cancodine is in trouble now." Silence settled over the cart again. Then Jack continued calmly. "After all, the Kadrisar Empire has started looking outward again." No one interrupted. They all understood what that meant. Expansion, war, pressure. Jack looked at each of them one by one. "When we arrive in Brasken, I want the 3 of you gathering information." His tone remained calm but firm. "I'll be using the local crime families for part of the operation. They will help accelerate the timeline of my plan." He paused briefly. "But criminals are predictable. Greed eventually convinces them they should hold the power instead." One of the men smirked faintly. Jack noticed. "And when that happens," he continued, "I want to know where their warehouses are, where their money moves, where they store weapons, and where they sleep." The smirk disappeared immediately. "Because if any of them attempt to double-cross me," his eyes shifted back to the dark window, "we remove them." No emotion, no hesitation, only certainty. Jack folded his hands again. "Remember your tasks.
Gather information carefully. Everything has value eventually. The train continued through the darkness. Hours later, it finally began slowing. Outside, the lights of Brasken appeared under a cloudy night sky. Rain threatened overhead. Steam hissed loudly as the train pulled into the station. The four stepped onto the platform. Jack adjusted his gloves calmly, then looked toward the others. "You already know your assignments." The three nodded. "Good. Report back to me at the inn tomorrow evening." He glanced briefly toward the distant streets of the city. "There are a few things I want to inspect personally." Without another word, they split up, each disappearing into different parts of the city. Jack walked alone. The streets near the river were quieter than the rest of the city. Wet stone roads, dim lantern light, the distant sound of water moving slowly in the dark. Then suddenly, a young girl ran out from an alley and nearly collided with him. She immediately hid behind him in panic. Two men followed only moments later. "Well, well, well," one of them grinned. "What is someone dressed like you doing in this part of the city?" Jack did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes shifted briefly toward the girl. That was when he noticed it. Her left forearm was missing. Old burn marks shaped like a slave brand covered her right arm, and across her back and shoulder, visible beneath torn fabric, were similar branding marks from slavery. Jack slowly looked back toward the men. "I take it," he said calmly. "She belongs to your merchandise."